Figure it out.
Hello, this is Adam Koralik from Figured Out Productions. The following video is a video of some kind, and I hope you enjoy it.
Hey guys, it's Adam here, and today we're going to be talking a bit about the recent Nintendo Switch 2 announcement from that April 2nd Direct. A little bit of what's been happening ever since then. We'll go over the Direct a little bit and just give some kind of thoughts, impressions, and just, I don't know, generally talk about the Nintendo Switch 2, because a lot of you guys have been asking me about it. Before we do that, though, if you guys could do me a favor, please like this video, comment down below, subscribe if you've never done that before, as well as check out all the social media stuff in the description. I've got Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, Discord, Patreon, Spreadshirt, Travel Channel, etc. Appreciate the support on those platforms. Thank you so much. Let's get into it. So, like a lot of you, I watched the Nintendo Switch Direct, or Nintendo Direct on the Switch 2 on April 2nd, 2025, and like a lot went through my mind. And I obviously want to take a little bit of time here to discuss it with you guys. A ton of you were commenting on my various social media outlets, particularly on YouTube, being like, yo, where's the Switch 2 video? First of all, I didn't have time to make it right away. You know, I was doing other things. I was at a convention in Milwaukee, but also I kind of, with news, I typically like to let it sit and marinate a little bit, especially big things like that, because a lot changes so quickly. I was trying to keep you guys a little bit up to date as best I could via Twitter and Facebook, and, you know, to a lesser extent, like within the YouTube channel, it's just like the posting function. But, you know, aside from that, I just wasn't ready to make a video on it. Also, I hope you guys enjoy the fact that we have the fancy microphone out now, because this is a discussion video. You guys seem to only like this in the discussion videos. When there's anything else, this microphone must go away. So enjoy it while it's here. Right, so let's just start at the beginning with the actual Switch, or the actual Direct. I keep calling it the Switch Direct. The actual Direct on April 2nd. So like a lot of you, I sat there and I watched it live. And it successfully did what it was supposed to do. It got me kind of excited about the system. I was like, okay, this is kind of cool. You know, like I'm kind of into this. Obviously, they had a big focus on Mario Kart World, which admittedly looks like a really awesome game. They, you know, showed off more elements of the hardware, saying, okay, you know, it's an evolution of the concept of the Switch. You know, it has, it supports higher resolutions. It supports higher frame rates. We've also taken into account some of the things that people kept saying they wanted, things like game chat compatibility and, you know, stuff like that. All fine and good. And then it kind of wrapped up by giving us just some more basic information. It showed us a lot more games, things like the new Donkey Kong game, which was a bit of a shocker. Obviously, the plethora of third-party developers that are like, hey, we're bringing X, Y, and Z games over to this thing, etc. Kind of the usual PR stuff that one would expect. They also talked about some of the other functionalities, like it's going to have a camera option so that certain games can support that, or game chat, etc. can support that. They're going to give you online access to, you know, Nintendo Switch Online for various things for a temporary trial. There's certain online elements that are going to be free, I think, until March of 2026. And then after that, the full subscription is required again. Nintendo Switch Online is going to, and I actually predicted this like 2 years ago, although I thought they would do it for Switch 1, was that I think I said the future of the Switch lies in the past, referring to the GameCube, and that's exactly what's happening. They're going to bring GameCube titles over to the Switch 2 via Switch Online. Those will not be on the Switch 1. And then finally, they basically went over the release date, which is June 5th, 2025. That's all the Direct itself really did. After that, we started getting more information, and this is kind of the dirty stuff. So where to even start with this? I guess we'll go with price point. So prices started leaking throughout the world because of various different contexts. Nintendo themselves did not really give an official price, but various retailers in different countries, for different reasons with different SKUs, kind of set up some different things. So here's kind of what we need to truncate it. Roughly, we are under the expectation that in the US, the standard bundle that comes with no title of any kind will retail for about $450 plus tax, where in states where tax is applicable, as there are various states where that is not the case. New Hampshire, Delaware, Montana, I believe, Oregon, Alaska, and then some US territories like Guam, etc., do not have sales tax. Others do, most do, etc. So that's the rough idea. Then there are places, and this is, by the way, to everyone in Europe in particular who's like, why does the US not include taxes in its prices? It's because tax is not federal. There is no such thing as federal sales tax in the United States, aka Washington, D.C. Congress cannot set a tax only states can do that. States can do that, and then counties can do that, and cities can do that. So, for example, I live in Chicago, so the state of Illinois has one layer of tax. The Cook County, which is the county I'm in, has a different tax, and then the city of Chicago has its own specific tax. And you add that up, and that's how you get sales tax just for this zone. But other parts of the country, say Alaska, there's zero sales tax within the state. There's no county that has tax, and there's no city that has tax. So that's why we don't do that, because it's completely inconsistent across the country. Keep in mind how big the United States is, including territories around the world: Guam, CNMI, Puerto Rico, U.S. Virgin Islands, American Samoa, etc. I think American Samoa actually has the highest sales tax in the United States. I think at like 13%, which compared to parts of Europe that have like 35% sales tax is a joke. But that's why prices are different here, and why I understand why you guys get frustrated with us. Well, that's one of many reasons to get frustrated with the Americans, but it doesn't matter. Anyway, so roughly that's the price point that we're looking at. There's also apparently a second Mario Kart World bundle that's going to retail for about $500, again, US in the same context. Now, that's just the United States. Other countries, obviously the European Union is not a country, but it's vaguely been, about the same in euros, but slightly higher because, again, with the value of the euro, as well as additional taxes, sales taxes, etc. The Great British Pound, so we're seeing what they're doing, etc. The different price points around the world, but relatively average. The only one that kind of stands out is Japan. Now, this is kind of worth noting, and this came up as a big discussion point in my Discord. Japan is going to have a far cheaper version of the Nintendo Switch. And to the point where I saw a lot of people in my Discord being like, oh, okay, I'll just import the Japanese version. Now, we need to really dive into that, because it seems like there is a really distinct reason this is happening, but a lot of people are not bothering to learn why that is. Like, why would Japan, because I think they're getting a version of the Switch 2 that retails for like about $300, something like that. Why? Why do they get one that's so much cheaper? Well, why wouldn't I just buy that, import it, and it's like I have no income duty, like, fees or taxes or anything like that. Systems are region free. Obviously, I'm just going to do that. No, Nintendo knows you're thinking to do that, so they intentionally are making that version of the system region locked to Japan. Apparently. Now, Japan is going to have a cheaper variant of the system, as well as what they're calling, the global version or international version, virgin, not virgin, version. There will be a lot of virgins playing this thing. Let's keep it real. But anyway, I should hope so. They're children. What's wrong with you? Setting all that nonsense aside, no, there's going to be a more expensive version of the system that's available there that is what we would think of as the standard version of the Switch 2. While the Japanese, domestic version has to exist for reasons I think that most people around the world, particularly Americans, are not bothering to try and learn the reasoning behind. This was an actual point of contention with my Discord, people being like, how come they get it cheaper? That's not fair. The reason they're getting it cheaper is because their country's economy is collapsing in on itself. The geopolitics of Japan is not in a good place. So you've not maybe noticed, at least casually, if you're into video games, that a lot of people, such as myself, have been going to Japan a lot more frequently. There's a reason for that. The country is cheaper than ever to attend, not because Japan in of itself has just decided, hey, everything's going to be cheaper. It's because the value of the yen has utterly tanked, especially in comparison to the American dollar, making it, from our perspective, cheaper than it's ever been. However, that does not, correlate to their own domestic production. So, economics is complicated and difficult, but let's put it this way. If you earn minimum wage in the United States, that is not a lot of money. Just like when Japan, if they're earning a minimum wage, that is not a lot of money. However, with the adjustment in the currencies, an American minimum wage now looks like not a primo salary, but looks far better in Japan, aka your buying power is far less. I see memes that are very misleading all the time on the internet of people being like, how come Japan has $3 meals? It's not fair. Why does my sandwich cost $14.99? Whatever. Because in Japan, the $3 meal is essentially the equivalency of a $15 buying power. They have no choice but to deal with it that way. Yes, to you going that one direction, it looks great. For them coming in the other direction, if they were to have their normal buying power of the yen show up in North America, it would be like buying a sandwich for $50. It would be ridiculous. So they have no choice but to create a cheaper variant of the system that only their audience can use. And frankly, region controls are the only police protection, if you will, that they have to keep the system domestic. This will also lead to other oddball issues in relation to the carts. Now, I can't spend like an hour talking about the geopolitics and the economics of why Japan is in the situation that it's in. It largely has to do with demographic collapse, which a lot of countries are dealing with. The only country in worse shape than them is South Korea. Basically, if you think about population, right? It's supposed to be in a pyramid. The oldest people being on the top, people who are like 100 years old, and then theoretically at the bottom is your youngest, newest generation of people who are born. And the natural progress of time, people die off, but new people replace them. Since the end of World War II, that pyramid in most urban developed countries has gone into like this. It is completely flipped upside down because of medical advances. People are living longer, but also because of economic hardships and social changes, aka not everybody lives on a farm anymore. People are, instead of having like 10 kids, they're having like one or none because kids are extraordinarily expensive. The end result, project that forward after about, 80 years, is a pyramid that's upside down. And that's basically what's happening in Japan. They don't have a new tax base and a new economic base to start doing all that work. They don't have people working in factories because they just don't exist. So that's creating a new problem. And what little youth they do have, they're now starting to be like, well, what industries can we still be successful in? A lot of it has to do with tourism. Tourism economy is a trap for any society. Look at anybody in the Caribbean. Their entire existence is just cater to rich people coming to us. The Japanese are very aware of the problem. They see it coming. They have no way to deal with it. And so that's a very long, convoluted story that doesn't have anything to do with video games, but that social box is why you're getting a cheaper version of the Switch, and so that you don't continue to exploit them, which is frankly what a lot of us do, myself included. When you go over to Japan, you're like, oh my God, the yen tank, this is so great for me. You're exploiting their failures and their problems. That's essentially what you're doing. So they're trying to police that a little bit, hence the cheaper version. Now, because that technology clearly exists, Nintendo may be willing to do that in other countries for other reasons. I mean, we live in a strange, turbulent time, but I'm not going to get into all that because it's irrelevant to the video. But that solves that part. Now, let's talk about the game cards. So here's the thing that we understand about this. There are physical media game cards for the Switch 2, which sounds great, except that they don't really work the way we would traditionally associate Nintendo game data to function. They actually function more like Xbox One discs. Now, the Xbox One, and to be honest, the PS4 and forward, what they've always done is they said, okay, the disc doesn't really contain the game data. It effectively just contains an unlock key. Sometimes it'll have some of the data. It's completely optional. But what it's going to do is have an unlock key, and then the system goes into a cloud and then downloads the remaining data that it needs. We've been used to this, sadly, since 2013. That's basically how this has been going. Nintendo was the least guilty of this. The Wii U actually contained game data on the discs. Obviously, it needed patches here and there, but the single biggest patch on the Wii U was for Sonic Boom, which was about 1 gigabyte. That was the biggest one and the most offensive one. Whereas the Switch obviously still had game data on the cards, but it did have certain limitations, and there were just a lot of developers who outright didn't really want to use it that well, and they would just say right on the box, like, hey, this game, especially the sports games, like the 2K ones, would just straight up say, like, hey, you need to download most of the game. It seems like this is now going to be more standard with the Switch, that the physical card is mostly just ancillary, to make guys like me feel like, oh, I bought a thing. There's not really a thing there. It's an option, you can do it, but in most cases, it won't be. Now, what we understand, and this is still kind of, a little bit from some buddies I've talked to in the industry who are actually working on this, and there's certain details that are coming out of this. There are multiple size cards that developers have the choice to use. Now, from what we understand, CD Projekt Red, for example, who is going to put out Cyberpunk on the Switch, has decided to go for a full physical media release. And they're using a 64 gigabyte card, which is currently considered the maximum. Although there are rumors, and I keep it there as rumors, that there are bigger cards, maybe up to 128, that only Nintendo themselves has access to currently, where they have that much data capacity. Now, because they're using a 64 gigabyte card, CD Projekt Red is able to just barely get Cyberpunk in its completion on a single card. But they're kind of the outlier of people who want to do it right. Technically, you don't even have to have data on the card. You just have to have it say, like, oh, this is the game, go download it. I guess the standard size is going to be much smaller, maybe down to like 8 gigabytes. Now, think about what modern games would fit on 8 gigabytes. Now you might be like, well, why don't they just put the game data on there and just like not even worry about it? Because every size higher you go with the data, the cards get more expensive, and there is no financial incentive for the developer to care about that. Now let's take a Ubisoft or whatever. It doesn't matter what company. They're sitting there like, okay, we've done some analysis and we see that most people are downloading our games anyway, so it doesn't really matter how we distribute them. We'll put out a token physical media release just because we want to, so that people can say they bought it in the store shelves. We get some sales from that. But really, they're just going to download the same file we already have up on our server. So there's no incentive to put out the 64 gigabyte card, which costs us more money to produce, and give them the full game when we could easily just put out like the smallest card available with just the file that says go grab it. And then we expect our client to basically, or customer, to go and just wait, until the file has downloaded. Unfortunately, that's the reality we set up for ourselves. That's how most companies are going to approach this, because it's more cost effective to do it that way. And sadly, and I've been warning you guys about this for really since the inception of this channel nearly 16 years ago, this is coming. And now it is here. We have reached a point where physical media really doesn't matter anymore. And that kills me as someone who obviously loves physical media and the right of ownership. But that's effectively gone. The Nintendo Switch 2 effectively gives Nintendo the option to say, hey, we offered it, it's there, anybody can do it, while not really addressing the fact that nobody is going to, because the financial incentive is not there. There is not a rallying cry around customers to have all data on the game card or on the disc. We lost and gave up on that battle over a decade ago. The last time we had any sort of meaningful attempt there was the 2013 Xbox One DRM debacle. And since then, we've just been slowly accepting their, the shit they're throwing in our faces. It's just how it is. So we have arrived. Now, it does technically use physical media, great, but in most instances, it won't matter. I would bet that Nintendo themselves are probably a little less guilty of exploiting that, because they've always been kind of good about it, but I would expect a lot of third-party content to not really care. Now, the reason I brought up why that kind of ties into Japan is, so if Japan has its own region-locked variant of the system, we could be taking a step backwards here, because a lot of games that came out on the Switch, and especially like even other modern platforms, PS5, whatever, Xbox, etc., have just decided to effectively have the same release across all regions, and then just depending on what variant of the system you have or what language settings you have it set to, it just plays in your language. Not in every case, obviously, but in a lot of cases that seems to be. But in Japan, if you have your own locked ecosystem for your own locked market that's homogenous in its language, you may find scenarios where the Japanese variants of the games just truly don't bother with an English dub anymore, because if they're using the actual data on the card, it's wasted space effectively. That's a step backwards, and that really sucks, and that's probably going to play out further as we go. But I guess I would warn you, we don't know yet, but I would warn you to be a little wary of whatever Japanese exclusives exist, because they may not work on your future Switch 2. Okay, with that kind of stuff out of the way, let's talk about some of the other features. We know now that the backwards compatibility option is limited for a reason. It's not true hardware. It's like half hardware, half emulation, kind of the way the European launch PS3 handled PS2 support. Games out of the gate, Nintendo's own website already says, like, yeah, there's a bunch of games that won't work. Then it says, here's the games that like kind of work, here's the games that work better, here's the games that seem to work, and here's the games that work really well. That's how they're doing it. They're breaking it down. And to Nintendo's credit, they're like openly telling everybody, like, yeah, it's not going to be perfect. Their own website admits it's basically just emulation. So I would say consider Switch 1 functionality on the Switch 2 to be a bonus feature and not a replacement. So if you really like the Switch 1 and the games you have for it, don't trade in your original Switch thinking, oh, this will go towards the payment of that. Keep that system, or you will regret it, because you will be like, oh, this game doesn't work. Oh, this game's buggier than it used to be, etc. That's just personal suggestion. Obviously, do whatever you want. So yeah, that's fun. Now, let's talk about other potential X factors with prices, particularly for Americans. There are reasons to think that all right, look, I don't like to talk politics, and I'm not going to, but this obviously is very recent events. There are the potential for tariffs in the United States to make stuff from other countries more expensive. Now, I'm not going to go into all the minutiae of that, but it seems like Nintendo, to their credit, does not want tariffs to hit their products, which makes sense. It makes their product needlessly more expensive and makes it so a large percentage of the market is unable to buy it. So they're doing everything they can to circumvent it. Due to recent events, they are going to be able to get most of that stock in before any such thing could take place, with one exception, which is stuff from China, at least at the time of this recording. Now, here's the thing. Before all this recent events, like literally over the course of the past decade, the United States, as well as the European Union, the Australians, a lot of the Western world has actually moved a lot of their manufacturing out of China anyway. In fact, the majority of your manufacturing now comes from India, Vietnam, and Mexico. To that end, in this particular context, Nintendo has actually earmarked specifically Switches built in Vietnam to be the ones sold in the United States because it would bypass any sort of Chinese-imposed tariff or tariffs imposed upon Chinese products, more accurately. So they found a nice little way around that. That's the extent of what I want to talk about with that particular subject in this video. Basically, Nintendo is doing everything they can to avoid you having to pay tariffs on any sort of Nintendo Switch merchandise. Great. So let's talk about the games as far as pricing. It seems like they're going to average around 90 euros. Okay? And that's, again, including sales tax and etc. So in the United States, it's looking more like it's going to be like $80 to a game, but it can be as low as like 50. It really depends on the title. Mario Kart World might be the exception just because of what it is and how vast it is, etc. So this is the part where I have to go, yeah, that sucks, but... Okay, $450 for a console. Let's assume $70 average price per game. When you hear that, as someone in my case who is 38 years old, you go, man, that's expensive. What the hell happened to games? I remember when the Dreamcast came out, it was like $200 and games were like $40 a piece. That's the old fogey moment. I hate to say it. Like, you're the kind of guy that's like, I remember when my candy was a nickel. Unfortunately, that's the point we've gotten to. If you actually adjust for inflation, then these things are about the price they've always been, if not even cheaper. And I know that sucks to hear, but the problem is, while the value of the dollar has obviously shifted over the course of time, what hasn't adjusted is the buying power, which is what we were discussing before with Japan. So you as the consumer, you feel more of that $450. That hurts a lot more than, $200 used to, even though that $200 had more value than the $450 because the amount of money you were making as minimum wage and things like that have not kept up. That's, again, external factors to economics. We could talk about this for hours if this was the right channel to do so. Economics is convoluted and complicated. It is very difficult. But to truncate it, yes, it's super easy to just sit there and complain about the price of something. It really is. Like, I don't want to pay $450 for this thing. I don't want to pay $70 a game. But ironically, it costs less than it would have if this had been released in like the mid-90s. Stuff in the mid-90s was actually coming out more than this. But again, buying power is different than it used to be. So the ultimate question, do I want one? I don't know. I mean, I really don't know, which is kind of a sad point. Like I said at the beginning of this, I watched that Nintendo Direct. And I was having a good time with it. I was like, I'm on board. I'm enjoying this. Like, there's certain quirks I'm not a huge fan of, but whatever. Like, I'm into it. But all the side stuff is the stuff, like the complicated stuff. The fact that Switch 1 stuff is an afterthought. Okay, so basically you have to go into this being like, this thing must stand on its own. Despite the fact of what it obviously is, which is just a physical firmware update. That's what the Switch 2 is. It's kind of like, I don't know if you guys saw my Xbox Series X review back in 2020, but my assessment of it in short was, this is a physical firmware update. They gave us the exact same ecosystem as the Xbox One. They obviously upgraded the hardware. As soon as you logged in your account, you were back right in the same thing, minus some stuff that didn't work. In the case of the Xbox Series X, Kinect games no longer worked. But outside of that, pretty much everything the same, but running a little better. And that's cool in the convenience factor, but does not exactly feel like a wholly new experience. You know, I am old enough to remember that every console was supposed to feel like an entirely new experience. You know, like it wasn't just a box that lit up that played some games. It's supposed to be an entire story that's trying to captivate you, you know, not only with its design elements, but really the messaging of the system and what they're trying to achieve with it. The Switch 2 lacks that because it's just, again, it's just a firmware update. It's like cell phone model stuff. They're just upgrading it. Fine. I accept that. That doesn't make it exciting to me, but I accept that. Now, with that said, it seems like under the hood, it's going to be kind of the same way, you know, as far as what it does with performance. Again, emulation from Switch 1 games, fine, whatever. But Switch 2 stuff, they're like, well, you know, we technically can hit 4K. Technically, we can hit 120 FPS. However, from what I'm hearing internally, almost nothing actually reaches those benchmarks. It's like the PS5 said 8K on the box because technically it's able to do that, but nothing is actually created that can really hit that mark. It's going to be kind of the same way with the Switch 2. No game is, other than maybe some very small indie titles, are going to hit 120 FPS at 4K. The hardware simply isn't there. Even Nintendo admitted as much within the Direct when I believe they were talking about one of the I think it was a Metroid Prime remaster. Maybe it was one of those games, or Metroid Prime 4 even. It was probably Metroid Prime 4. They were basically talking like, we can have a 4K mode or 120 FPS mode. Like, which one do you prefer? Go with whichever you prefer. Do you know why they have to do that? Because the hardware is not capable of doing both, which no one expected. No one reasonable. I expected this thing to be essentially a PS4 Pro in your pocket, and it looks like that's basically what it is. And that's fine at this point in time. The soft bigotry of low expectations. That's all I expected out of Nintendo, was just kind of you know, as far as the hardware. Is that acceptable? Maybe, because we've been tolerating Nintendo giving us kind of mediocre hardware for nearly 20 years since the launch of the Wii. We no longer expect them to be hardware competitive. Just passable. Fine. You know, like, what else do you want to say about that? So, kind of the last thing I want to say on that element of things is, so we do know that there are going to be specific Switch 1 titles that are specifically enhanced for the Switch 2, but it's not like, hey, you put it in the system and it gets like a full 1080p update. You have to buy said update. And so, like, a couple of the games they pointed out was like Tears of the Kingdom, Breath of the Wild, like the Zelda stuff, for example. They're like, yeah, you can play the original version on the system. However, you can also buy like a $15 upgrade pack that gets you like modern textures and modern resolution support, et cetera, to make the game, you know, feel like a new Switch 2 experience. Effectively paying for the upgrade, paying for the patch. And only today did we find out they're not going to be including DLC today at the time I record this. Did we find out they're not going to be including the DLC within that? That's weird. And then at the same time, if you don't want to do that, if you're like, hey, I never bought the game in the first place, and I think they're actually, to their credit, again, this is rumored now. We'll find out if this is true when it launches. But supposedly, at least in Nintendo's, you know, own house case, certain games like, again, Tears of the Kingdom, Breath of the Wild, are going to have dedicated Switch 2 physical editions. So you don't. So like, if you're that guy out there who owned the Switch original versions, you're just like, hey, I want to try it with the new upgrades. I'm just going to pay the $15 and then pop my original Switch card in, and boom, I'm on my way. Fine. However, if you're like, no, I love physical media and I want like the true upgraded experience and I want to feel like I'm owning a new thing, they're also going to allow you to buy the full package, supposedly. Again, we exist in a world where this stuff isn't released yet, so, you know, who knows. But I'll give them credit for that one, but at the same time, it is really just reselling you the same thing over and over again. But that's the era we're in, you know. Like, unfortunately, I've said for years, you need to vote with your wallet, and what a lot of people have voted with their wallet for is to buy the same stuff over and over again. So again, that brings up the ultimate question, like, you know, do I want to buy this? Do I actually want it? And I'm the guy who owns two new ones. You know, I own an Apple Pippin. I own the Casio Loopy. I own a PV1000. I have all sorts of junk. It's junk I love for the reasons I already said. I like a console that's unique and has a history. It has a story. There's a whole thing behind it. The Switch 2, to me, lacks any sort of compelling story at the moment. It feels simply like, we need a new thing because we've pushed the original Switch too far. It's been around for 8 years. It's time to move on. Let's just do an upgrade. Historically speaking, when consoles do this well, like in the case of the Switch, the thing that follows it up comes with a lot of mistakes. Nintendo has done this. You know, the Wii famously did very well, and it killed the Wii U because they made a ton of mistakes around that arrogance. This, in a lot of ways, feels like that story again. Because the Switch, a lot of people, and I'm sure you guys remember this if you're going back and watching YouTube videos for the last decade almost, a lot of people don't consider it a home console. They consider it a portable, the true successor to the 3DS and the DS line. While others, such as myself, consider it a console, others consider it a hybrid, what have you. But one thing I think we can all agree on is that part of the reason that these handheld systems were always so successful is because the idea was it was just a pick up and go experience. The Switch is not completely immune to that. You know, it has needed patches and things. But for the most part, the games existed with on the cart. You could just kind of pop it in and just go. If you're creating a system where the majority of games have to download and have to update on a regular basis, much like an Xbox One or a PS5 or anything like that, Series X, whatever, are kids in particular, who are famously not patient people, going to want to deal with that? Are they going to want to get on the bus, go to school, and like, all right, guys, I'm going to pull out. Oh, I can't play it because like it needs to update, and I forgot to do that before I left the house because I had homework or I was eating breakfast, or I'm 9, so I didn't think about it. I don't know. I feel like this is people. I used the example before of like, say, a Ubisoft or something, saying like it's cheaper for us to produce a version of the game that just has to download the files. And that's as far as they're thinking about it, as opposed to how does this work in practical terms? How will people respond to the fact that their portable on-the-go system is never really ready to go? I will give Nintendo credit. At least they're not locking these game cards. I don't know why people are giving them that much credit for it exactly, because I've seen a bunch of people celebrating. Like, oh, yeah, we can have resale media. I'm like, we've always had that, except for when Xbox tried to get rid of it. But yay, they did the bare minimum. Like, why are we celebrating that one? But whatever. So at least they didn't make it worse. Awesome. Yeah, I don't know. I am still not decided on actually getting a Switch 2. And it's not for the lack of the games. I want to make that very clear. A lot of the games actually look a lot of fun. And that's just kind of a given with Nintendo. We know they're going to give you a good gaming experience. The actual games will be fun. It's more about like everything else around it that I'm kind of like weary about. At the time of this recording, we just found out that on May 8th, I guess, is when U.S. retailers are going to start allowing some measure of pre-orders, depending on certain applicability. I don't know what that is at the moment, but get ready, I guess. So, yeah, that's kind of my unprocessed, unfiltered thoughts on this whole thing. I'm sure I could sit here and talk about this for hours, but yeah, it's probably been long enough. Like, what are you guys thinking? Honestly. Do you want this? Are you happy with the direction it's in? Can you give me a nuanced debate on whether or not, you're into this? As opposed to, and I know people, like I already talked about the price thing, but you will get a lot of, Nintendo is greedy. I hate to break it to you, but companies exist for the sole purpose of generating revenue. That's the whole reason they exist. It's like, I don't know what job you do, but it's like me describing you as greedy for doing that job. I bet you do that job because you like to eat food, much like I do, very clearly. And so you need to work. That's their purpose. Now, there's a difference between, exploitation greed and just trying to generate simple profits. There's a huge difference there. And exploitation greed could have been a factor. It's possible. Like I said, typically when a console is too successful, the successor does some dumb stuff. That's the debate to have. But rather than the simplistic $450 greedy, break that down a little bit. We already tried to in this video, but I'm genuinely curious, like what else anybody has to say on this. Are you getting one? If you can, do you want one? I think that they had the misfortune of timing this when the economy is really, really at the forefront of a lot of people on this planet being like, what is happening? What is happening? Why? And then suddenly that drops in because the mental expectation, sadly, with Nintendo, and this is kind of their own fault because they always put themselves in this box, was saying like, we're going to be the affordable hardware. But Nintendo, as a corporation, has always said, we want to be able to make money on the hardware, which was never anybody else's model, really. Sony famously, give away the razor to sell the blades logic. They sold PlayStation hardware at a loss until that bit them in the ass with the PS3. Microsoft always sells at a loss. They don't care. It's more of a jobs program to make sure that they're relevant, brand relevant. Nintendo has to make money on the hardware. But it looks like, based on what I'm reading, they may end up selling the hardware at a loss, but not because of their own issues, but because of economic factors, the devaluing dollar, stock market problems, potential tariffs, all these other external factors have nothing to do with them. And of course, just kind of the end of globalization, but that's again, different discussion. So enough rambling. Tell me guys, what do you think? You going to get one? I want to know. Hit me up, comment down below. So again, do me a favor, like the video, comment down below, subscribe if you haven't done that before, and check out all the social media stuff in the description. Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, Discord, Patreon, Spreadshirt, Travel Channel, etc. I appreciate the support. And stay tuned because I'm going to have more videos. Because one thing I hope, I want to get like personal about the channel for a second. One thing I hope you guys appreciate about this channel is that I do not chase trends. This video, if I had put this out, I could have recorded this on a phone from a distance after Nintendo Direct and be like, Nintendo bad, man. It's like expensive and stuff. And I probably would have got like 500,000 views on that. But I don't do that. I try to bring you guys an articulate argument about something. I try to show you unique content. I don't like, news for views or clickbait trash. It does cost me a lot because there's a lot of videos that people just don't watch. Like, I know after this, you know what I'm going to make a video on? I got access to a boxed up original VM Labs Nuon, and I'm going to unbox it for you because no one ever has. That does not exist on YouTube with the exception of one Samsung Nuon iteration from like 10 years ago. That's the kind of content I wish more people cared about watching, and I know they don't. But I hope you guys appreciate that I am doing that for you still at this point in time. I don't know how much longer I can, to be completely frank with you, but I hope you guys enjoy it while you can. I hope you guys will at least, at the very least, enjoy this video. Consider subscribing, consider liking the video, commenting, and following on the social media. Consider Patreon, consider donating to the channel, all that sort of stuff. And if not, fine. As I said before, I believe in the concept of voting with your wallet. If you vote me out of existence with a lack of a wallet, you have made a decision, and that's fine. That is your choice to make. But you can also make that decision for Nintendo. Vote with your wallet. Choose what's best for you and what you believe in. Anyway, thank you very much for watching. I'll see you all later.